Hello, everyone. This week we are covering Chapter 2 and 3. It builds on the work last week, but also builds on work from other classes. If you have taken biology already, then you will already know much of what is in Chapter 3, and it will be reviewed for you. If not, then you will need to read Chapter 3 more carefully. Much of what you learn will be used uh, in other classes throughout your nursing program. So, this really is fundamental knowledge that you need to understand for coming classes. I hope you leave this chapter understanding at least the following three things. Do children's experiences follow you into adulthood and impact how you react and perceive the world? If you grew up in a different place or time, would you be who you are today? And finally, is it important to understand the different theories and why? Let's discuss these issues. There are three main types of grand theories in psychology. Grand theories are those comprehensive ideas often proposed by major thinkers, people that by the time you graduate from college, you have heard so many times in so many different classes, you're just going to know who they are. Sigmund Freud, Erikson, and Jean Piaget. There are three main types of grand theories we're going to discuss: psychodynamic, behaviorism, and cognitive. A developmental theory is a comprehensive statement of general principles that provides a framework for understanding how and why people change as they grow older. Why is it that I no longer act like I did when I was a child? I don't even act like I did when I was in my 20s. Theories produce hypotheses, they generate discoveries, and offer practical guidance. You should recognize these terms, hypothesis, discoveries, and practical guidance, from what you read last week in Chapter 1. If you don't remember them, if you don't remember a hypothesis or independent and dependent variable, now's a good time to take a break and go back and review those. Let's start with psychodynamic theory. The psychodynamic theories propose that inner drives, motives, and unconscious needs are rooted in childhood. This is why there's so many Freud jokes about your mother, and why so many psychotherapists and psychologists make jokes when mothers are doing something to a child, saying that'll make me rich later on. Freud focused on psychosexual development, while Erikson focused on psychosocial stages. If you review Table 2.1 in your book, there is a side-by-side comparison by age that I think you will find very helpful. Freud believed that each stage had its own structures, struggles, and conflicts, and that those stages essentially ended in puberty, while Erikson believed that family, friends, and community who nurture a person are crucial for that person's development. He also recognized that development was lifelong and it did not end with puberty. Some of the key aspects that I think you should pay attention to and the differences between the two are that Freud had an emphasis on unconscious. He called it the id. It's the things that we think and we do that we don't even recognize. Erikson, on the other hand, focused on adaptive abilities of the ego. Freud believed that we prioritized at the sexual level of development. And if you look at his stages of development, they are by age. Oral fixation. Oral is that time when children are breastfeeding and they're feeding it, and they associate that oral sensation with pleasure. The anal time is when they are being potty trained and they are learning to control their own bowel habits and so forth. He also believed that we were oriented to explaining causes of psychopathology and that behavioral and intellectual patterns are set early in life. In fact, many of them he believed were set before the age of 6. Erikson thought that we were oriented to constructive and progressive resolutions. In other words, we learned, and that much important development takes place after the first 6 years of life. Behaviorism is the second area to discuss. Behaviorism was the dominant theory in the 20th century, and it's associated with Pavlov. Most of us know it from our first psychology class and the study of Pavlov's dog. He noticed that dogs drooled at a smell of food. But then he used a tuning fork to make a sound when he fed his dog, and eventually the dog drooled at the sound of the tuning fork, even without the presence of food. In other words, our reactions can be conditioned. We learn by association. One of the most common is that babies learn to smile at the sight of their parents. We learn to react when we see a police car in the rearview mirror. We almost always check our speed. Even if we know that we're not speeding, we still look down and check our speed. This is classical conditioning. Operant conditioning, on the other hand, is when we act and then something follows that action. B.F. Skinner focused on what happens after a response. If consequences to a response are unpleasant, then the response isn't repeated. But if pleasant, then the response will be repeated. And finally, there is social learning, which is the association between one stimulus and another, which is classical conditioning, or past reinforcement, which is operant conditioning. This theory holds that some learning occurs through modeling when people copy what they see. If you've ever been to a Zen center, that is how you learn Zen practice. But it's also how many people learn sports. You watch the superstars, you watch the people that are older than you, that are really good, and you see what they do, and they imitate it. Take a closer look at table 2.2 in your book, and you will find a better explanation and the distinction of these 3 types of behaviorism. To help you out a little in this slide, I compared classical and operant conditioning. And I think what you see is that classical conditioning, we learn by association between events, even if the associations, one does not control the other. The response is involuntary or automatic, like the dog drooling. The dog didn't want to drool when there was no food present, but it now had that associated in its mind. Whereas in operant conditioning, the responses are voluntary. It operates on the environment. You can go through this and see the differences. And then you can go back to your book. And again, I really suggest that you learn Table 2.2. It will help you to remember the differences. Cognitive theory suggests that thoughts and expectations profoundly affect attitudes, values, emotions, and actions. Piaget is credited for using scientific observation with his own three babies. He took notes, very detailed notes, as only a scientist would, and found that his infants were curious and thoughtful, and that they developed new concepts. He identified four stages of cognitive development: the sensory motor, the pre-operational, the concrete operational, and the formal operational. The sensory motor is between birth and 2 years old. It is the time when an infant starts to be able to tell the difference between itself and an object. It recognizes the self as an agent of action, and it begins to act intentionally. In other words, it plays with the mobile you have hanging up above its bed, and it shakes its rattle to hear the sound. And then it also receives object permanence. So it realizes that things continue to exist even when they are no longer present. If you want to think about this, and any of you who has ever had a cat or a dog that chases its tail, and the dog or the cat's chasing its tail and it doesn't realize that the tail is part of it, that's when we're talking about differentiating self from objects. Or when it realizes that even though it can't see something, it knows it's still there. Pre-operation was between 2 years old and 7 years old. This is a time that you learn to use language and to represent objects and images by words. I think for many of you that have younger brothers and sisters, or you've been around the children of friends and family, you have heard when children are first learning to associate dog with an actual dog or cat with an actual cat. And the use of language, of course, then is reinforcing. Thinking is still rather egocentric. They have difficulty thinking about the viewpoints of others. In other words, children only think about children. They do not think about how that's going to impact anyone else. And they classify objects by single features. So they group things together by red blocks or green blocks, regardless of the shape of the blocks. So blocks are blocks. They may not think anything different or be able to further categorize. Then there's the concrete operational stage, 7 to 11-year-old. This is when you first start thinking logically about objects and events. You have conversations of numbers age 6, mass age 7, and weight age 9. You classify objects according to several features. So you can have things by size or shape or color. And then the formal operational period is 11 years and up, and they can think logically about abstract ideas and test hypotheses systematically. They be concerned about the hypothetical, the features, and ideological problems. It is when you are first able to have real mature thoughts. And this all starts at about age 11. Finally, we come to sociocultural. In sociocultural theory, human development results from the dynamic interaction between developing persons and their surrounding society. Culture isn't just outside, but we make it part of us. Vygotsky saw children as being mentored by people that knew more. so by older children or older adults. He referred to it as guided participation. In his view, all cultural beliefs are social constructions. He doesn't believe in what's referred to as natural law. The customs are needed to protect the unity of a community. And so, in essence, what he's saying is they're made up rules. We make them up to keep us together as a community, to keep us safe, to help us thrive. The zone of proximal development is considered an area surrounding a person that includes all the skills and the knowledge and the concepts that the person is close to acquiring but hasn't quite yet mastered. And this requires mentoring. So there are the things that you can do when you're unaided. Those are the things you already know how to do. But then there are the things that you need a little guidance and assistance to do. And then there are the things that you can do on your own. One way to think of this is to think about a class, taking a class while you're in college. When you first start out in the class, you're going to know some things and be able to do them because you had other classes and you have other life experiences, or maybe you knew it from high school or from a job. And then there are going to be some pieces that if your instructor helps you just a little bit, then you're able to do it with a little bit of guidance. By the time you leave a class, you can usually do most of the tasks in that class without any supervision or assistance at all. Kind of like nursing. When you first start out at the bedside, we teach you little things. We teach you things that are so fundamental, how you take a blood pressure, a temperature, give a bath to a patient in bed. By the time you graduate, you are doing that all on your own. You're not even thinking anything about it. It's just automatic to you. And that is the zone of proximal development. Evolutionary theory believes that we have two long-standing biological drives, survival and reproduction. This can explain why we want children, why we form ourselves into families, and much, much more. The same theory explains why we prefer our own children over the children of others, why we will go out of our way to protect our own children, sometimes at the expense of others. There are many things that it explains in society. We know that when we see mass migrations of people from countries that are experiencing war or poverty or famine, that it doesn't matter the dangers or anything else. Parents will flee with their children to give those children a better chance in life. It is instinctual in us to do that. So when we try to basically say, oh, why would anybody do that? They can't help it. A lot of that really is evolutionary in nature. An example that's always often given is that of chimpanzees. If a male chimpanzee comes in and takes over a tribe, that chimpanzee will sometimes kill the infant chimpanzees because they are not his. And he wants to perpetuate his own genes. There is an old book that I would recommend to you called The Selfish Gene that will explain a lot of this. So, over our lifetime, we need to understand how our emotions and our impulses and our habits developed over the past 200,000 years. And if we try to understand the history and the evolution of human beings, then we are better able to understand some of the behaviors of human beings. We went through very quickly a few of the theories, the psychological theories, that impact how we look at growth and development of human beings. So, what do these theories contribute? Psychodynamic theories make us aware of the impact of early childhood experiences, remembered or not, on subsequent development. Behaviorism shows the effect that immediate responses, associations, and examples have on learning moment by moment and over time. Cognitive theories bring any understanding of intellectual processes that thoughts and beliefs affect every aspect of our development. Sociocultural theories remind us that development is embedded in a rich and multifaceted cultural context, evident in every social interaction. And evolutionary theories suggest that human impulses need to be recognized before they can be guided. This is just a brief overview of Chapter 2. It should give you an idea of some of the areas you need to read more carefully and learn more about.